He was 22 years old. He had never lost a battle. He had never been defeated in anything. Not in the training grounds of Macedonia, not in the wrestling pits, not in the political courts of his father's kingdom. He had been raised to believe he was descended from Achilles on one side and Hercules on the other. He had been taught by the greatest philosopher who ever lived, and he had been watching his father conquer half of Greece while he sat, waiting, burning with a hunger that had no name. His name was Alexander, and the world was about to learn what that meant. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strip of water that separates Europe from Asia. He stood at the bow of his ship and threw his spear into the Asian soil before he even stepped off the boat. It was not just a gesture, it was a declaration. He was claiming Asia as his own, earned by the spear, his to conquer. He was 22 years old, and he was coming for the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The Persian Empire stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean all the way to the mountains of India. It controlled Egypt, Babylon, Persia itself. It commanded armies of hundreds of thousands. It had crushed rebellions from nations far stronger than Macedonia. Its king, Darius III, ruled over more than 50 peoples, more than 1 million square miles of earth. Persia was not just a kingdom, it was the world, and Alexander had 32,000 soldiers. The Persian satraps, the regional governors who commanded the western armies, heard that the young Macedonian king had crossed into Asia. They were not afraid. They gathered their forces on the eastern bank of a river called the Granicus. They positioned their cavalry along the ridge above the riverbank. Horses, armor, spears, a wall of Persian power designed to stop Alexander before he could even begin. Their Greek mercenary advisor warned them. His name was Memnon of Rhodes. He told them, "Do not fight Alexander in open battle. Burn the fields. Destroy the food supply. Pull back. Force him to march through empty land with no supplies. Starve him out. Let Macedonia's greatest weapon, Alexander himself, be turned to dust by hunger and distance." The satraps refused. They believed Persian pride demanded they stand and fight. They believed they would crush this Macedonian boy on the riverbank and send his head back to Darius as a trophy. They were wrong. Alexander arrived at the Granicus River in the late afternoon. His generals surveyed the crossing. The river was fast-moving, chest-deep in places, with muddy banks and a high ridge on the far side where the Persian cavalry waited. To cross there was madness. The horses would struggle in the current. His men would climb out of the water-soaked and off-balance directly into the spears of the Persian line. His most trusted general, Harmenian, told him to wait until morning. Rest the men. Cross at dawn when the light was with them. Alexander looked at the river. He looked at the Persian line, and he said, "We have just crossed the Hellespont. I am not going to be stopped by a small stream." He rode down to the riverbank. He told his commanders to form the attack. He put himself at the tip of the spear, literally, positioning himself with the companion cavalry, the finest horsemen in his army, on the right flank. And then he gave the order. The Macedonian line entered the water. The Persians rained arrows and javelins from the ridge above. Maneuvel! Horses screamed. The water turned red where the first riders were hit. The current pushed horses sideways. Soldiers scrambled to keep their footing on the slippery riverbed. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like the generals who had doubted Alexander were right. And then Alexander hit the far bank. He charged up the muddy ridge with his companion cavalry and smashed directly into the Persian cavalry line. The Persians had arranged their forces to target him specifically. Every satrap, every noble commander, every Persian officer of rank had been told, "Find Alexander. Kill the king and the army dies with him." They found him immediately. He was impossible to miss. He wore a white-plumed helmet. He carried a gold-trimmed shield. He rode toward them like he wanted to be seen. Because he did, two Persian nobles, Rosises and Spithridates, drove their horses directly at Alexander. Rosaces swung his cavalry sword and struck Alexander across the head. The blow shattered his helmet and cut into his scalp. Alexander was rocked but did not fall. He drove his spear through Rosaces' chest, killing him instantly. As the spear broke, he reached for his sword. At that exact moment, Spithridates raised his blade above Alexander's head. A killing blow aimed at the neck, about to end the conquest of Persia before it had truly begun. A hand came from nowhere. Cleitus the Black, one of Alexander's oldest friends, a man who had known him since childhood, drove his horse between Spithridates and Alexander and cut off the Persian's sword arm at the shoulder with a single blow. Spithridates fell. Alexander lived. The Persian cavalry line, which had expected to hold, began to fracture. The Macedonian infantry, the famous phalanx, carrying their 20-foot sarissa spears, had crossed the river behind Alexander and was now pushing up the bank. The Persians found themselves caught between Alexander's cavalry driving through them from above and the phalanx pressing forward from below. The satrap cavalry broke and ran. What was left were the Greek mercenaries, professional soldiers who had been hired by Persia to fight on their side. They formed a defensive circle in the field and asked Alexander for mercy. They expected him to show it. They were Greeks. He was Greek. Surely there was honor between them. Alexander refused. He charged the mercenaries. He told his commanders, these men fought against their own people. There would be no mercy, no ransom, no prisoner exchange. The mercenaries were destroyed almost entirely. It was the most brutal moment of the entire battle, and Alexander chose it deliberately. He wanted every Greek who considered selling their spear to Persia to know what it cost. The Battle of the Granicus was over in a single afternoon. The Persians had lost their satrap commanders. They had lost control of the western coast of Asia Minor. Dozens of cities along the Aegean shoreline opened their gates to Alexander in the days that followed. He sent 300 suits of captured Persian armor back to Athens as a gift, a message to all of Greece. We have answered the invasion of Xerxes. We have struck the first blow. The revenge is beginning. Alexander buried his dead with full military honors. He visited every wounded soldier personally. He named the ones who had fallen in the crossing. He paid for statues of the Macedonian soldiers who had died to be placed in the city of Dion, a monument not to generals, not to kings, but to the men who had crossed the water first. He was 22 years old, and he had just cracked open the Persian Empire like the shell of an egg. This was not the last battle. It was barely the first. Ahead of him lay the plains of Issus, the siege of Tyre, the deserts of Egypt, the heart of Persia itself, and mountains at the edge of the known world. Ahead of him lay a decade of warfare that no man before or since has ever matched for speed, scale, and audacity. But it began here, at a muddy river in the spring, with a young king who refused to wait until morning. He threw his spear into Asian soil to claim it as his own, and on the banks of the Granicus River, dripping with river water and blood, his helmet split and his scalp bleeding, he proved that he meant it. The world belonged to Alexander, and he was just getting started.